Gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I thank the committee. I'll try and, I guess, start as simply as I know how, which is Dr. Edwards, I think at the end of Mr. Carter's testimony, asked a question of Ms. Hedman, and I'll go ahead and ask it. He asked, did you warn Flint residents to flush their water?
On July 10th, 10 days after I first learned about this, EPA Region 5 issued the first statement advising Flint residents to get their water tested by their water utility and referring them to EPA information on the web about limiting exposure to lead in drinking water.
So is that your testimony when you said you gave them warning to flush their water? That's what you're referring to?
Right, that was the first time that we did that.
Okay, that was in July.
July 10th.
I'm looking at an email that's been mentioned a couple times, and to the extent it's not been entered in the record, Mr. Chairman, it's an email of Miguel Del Toro dated September 22nd, 2015. I asked it to be added to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I'm sitting here, are you familiar with this email, Ms. Hedman?
I'm not sure what the email is.
It begins, it's to Thomas Ploy, Rita Baer, Nicholas D'Amato, Joanna Glowacki, and Andrea Porter, amongst others, from Miguel Del Toro, September 22nd, 2015. Begins, this is no surprise, lead lines plus no treatment equals high lead in water equals lead poisoned children. You familiar with that email?
Only hearing it from you.
Okay. If you read down the email, by the way, I think the email was an email that you sent, Mr. Edwards, that was then forwarded. I'll get to that in a second, I hope. It says, even worse, absent anything from EPA, MDEQ, and the city other than they are in full compliance. Other folks have to alert the public to the risk. Do you get the impression from the email that Mr. Del Toro thinks that the EPA warned the folks in Flint in September to flush their water?
We had been told on August 31st by MDEQ that the Michigan, it was MCH, the old acronym for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, was in fact implementing a public information campaign. On September 15th, I held calls with both the mayor and with the director of MDEQ, urging expedited implementation of corrosion control and expanded public information campaigns. And the mayor and the county did issue a health advisory with that kind of information 10 days later.
All right. I wish I could go into every single one of those. I know Dr. Edwards is probably eager to do that, but I'm going to, you said something earlier today, which I think took a lot of us off guard, surprised a lot of people sitting here, when you said you didn't think the EPA had done anything wrong through this entire process. And my guess is if I asked you for evidence of that, you would lay out what you just laid out. We did this on this date, this on this date. Let me ask you this. Is that the standard to which you held yourself at the EPA? Just not to do anything wrong?
No.
What was the standard to which you held yourself when you were at the EPA?
To do the best job possible.
Did you do the best job possible?
In retrospect, knowing what I know now, I wish we had issued more frequent and more urgent statements.
But it's still your belief and your testimony that you didn't do anything, that the EPA and you didn't do anything wrong in handling the Flint situation.
As I said, I wish we had done more. I wish when MDEQ represented facts to us, we had verified those.
Let me
facts.
ask you about that, because there's another thing you said today that again caught me a little bit off guard. It says the EPA, yes, in answer to questions from someone I apologize for getting who, is supposed to step in to protect safety, but only if there is a threat, which clearly there was, and the state has failed to act. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
Is it your testimony then that the state had not failed to act?
At which point in time?
At any point in time. I pick one. I don't care. September, by Mr. Del Toro's email of September 22nd, had the state failed to act by that time?
By that time, the state had issued an order to Flint directing Flint to implement corrosion control, and the mayor had announced that he was going to take that action.
My question is, had the state failed to act?
The state had taken some actions, and let me...
Not the standard. You said the EPA isn't really supposed to get involved unless there's a threat, number one, and the state has failed to act, number two. So I'm asking you, as of September, had the state failed to act?
We were involved, and the legal advice that I received at that time...
But you were involved, but people were still drinking lead-contaminated water. How is that possible?
We were involved in that. There are two things that we tried every day to make happen. One is implementation of corrosion control,
Okay.
and two is a public information campaign to make sure that Flint residents knew what they needed to do to reduce risks until corrosion control worked.
I'm not going to have nearly enough time to do any of this. I do want to ask Dr. Edwards one question before you said something, sir, earlier that interested me as well, which is you said that in a different environment, this would be criminal. What did you mean when you said that? I apologize if that's not the exact words, but you did use the words criminal.
I think in any environment, it's criminal when you know children are being harmed and not being protected by federal law, and you sit there silent.
And if
I will point out, Virginia Tech issued the first warning to not drink the water in August 2015. MDEQ invoked the authority of EPA in its response to the press, to our warning about the dangers of Flint water, to say the water was safe to drink. EPA sat there silent, at a minimum, as the state attacked us for saying Flint water was not safe to drink.
If I had done this as a terrorist to the children of Flint and I got caught, would I be in jail?
I've already said if a landlord did this, he would be in jail.
Or a builder, a home builder, which is what I used to do. If I built a house and poisoned my residents the same way the city of Flint has done it, I'd be in jail, wouldn't I? Which leads to my last question. Ms. Hedman, should the government be held to a different standard than its citizens?
Everyone should be required to follow the law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, witnesses, thank you for being here this morning. Mr. Early, on February 2nd, the Governor of Michigan, Rick Schneider, issued a statement informing the public of your resignation that was going to be effective on February 29th. Have you seen that press release?
Yes.
Okay. And in it states, and I'm going to quote here, Governor Schneider and I agreed that our goal was for me to be the last emergency manager appointed to DPS. I have completed the comprehensive restructuring necessary to downsizing the central office. That's your quote, correct?
That is.
And do you remember giving the quote to the governor for the press release for that?
Excuse me?
Do you remember giving the governor that quote for his press release?
Yes, I remember, not directly to him, but I discussed it with his communications people, yes.
Okay, and that press release and your resignation came a day before, less than 24 hours, before this committee was having a hearing on Flint, Michigan on February 3rd. The Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Cummings sent a letter in January for you to testify at that time, but you refused to come. When you were giving the quote to the governor's office for the press release the day before the hearing took place, did you have a conversation with the governor or with those individuals in his office about testifying before this committee?
No, my conversations regarding the letter that you referred to took place before that. They were only drafted on the 1st of February because we had pretty much done all in Detroit Public Schools as an emergency manager that I would be able to do.
So you discussed with him around February 1st, your resignation on February 2nd, and what the quote was going to be, but you knew that you had a pending request to testify before this committee at that time. Isn't that correct?
The exact...
Isn't that, did you know that you had to testify, that there was a request for you to testify on February 3rd when you were having discussions with the governor and his staff about your resignation on February 1st or 2nd?
We had that discussion prior to the 2nd.
You just said the 1st.
Well,
So
the first, the discussion, the press release came out after
the press release came out on February 2nd, less than 24 hours before this hearing. In your discussions with the governor about that press release, did you discuss with him your request, the request for you to testify before this committee?
It had nothing to do with the
That's just, it's a yes or no. Yes or no. Did you discuss it with him?
Yes.
You did discuss testifying before this committee?
I did discuss that I had been, had received the invitation, yes.
And what was said during that discussion?
That I had received an invitation.
And the governor, did he direct you to comply with that?
No.
and you did not at that time. So clearly, you had a discussion with the governor, a governor who has said he wants transparent and accountability for the individuals that are working, and you work for the pleasure of the governor. He did not direct you to testify when the request had been made by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform about this. So on February 2nd, when Chairman Chaffetz's staff informed your lawyer that the chairman was considering issuing a subpoena to compel you to testify before the committee on that day, did you discuss that with the governor?
No, I had that discussion with the attorney because I had to seek out some advice as to how to respond to the initial invite, because I did not have time to prepare for a hearing, was more than willing and certainly wanted to come forward and discuss the facts of this. That had nothing to do with my appointment at Detroit Public Schools.
But your appointment was made by the same governor who was, and you had it within you to discuss it with him, and you were serving at his direction. And even though that discussion had taken place, your attorney that you says you sought out about the subpoena, you told the attorney and asked him to refuse to accept the service of the chairman's subpoena because you said you didn't have time to coordinate your testimony, but you had time to coordinate on October 26th your op-ed in which you said don't blame the emergency manager for the Flint water disaster, and outlined reasons why that was your position at that time.
No, I did not discuss the subpoena in terms of not coming to this hearing. That was never a discussion that I had. I sought counsel because I wanted to understand the process. The invitation was what I said that I was not prepared to attend, not the subpoena.
So you did tell your attorney to refuse service of the subpoena?
No.
That was potentially being?
No.
Okay. That's important for us to note for the record. We have an email that says that you were being told that a subpoena was going to be issued to you at that time. You're aware of that?
I don't recall.
We have the email, Mr. Early.
Okay,
You want me to put it on the screen?
No. Yes, if you would, please.
Okay, could we do that? And at that time, while they're putting that up, that email exchange with your attorney, so now you're saying that the attorney didn't tell you that you were supposed to potentially be subpoenaed to testify before this committee?
I sought advice of counsel on the issue regarding the invitation, and then declined the invitation because I didn't have an opportunity to prepare.
I moved on from the invitation. I'm now talking about the subpoena.
Okay.
Did you have a discussion with your attorney about service and acceptance of the subpoena, potential subpoena?
That's an attorney-client issue that I would like to refer to my attorney to answer if it's that possible.
I'm glad he's not a plotted plant in this one, and he's going to give you some advice about that. That was very good. So did you inform the governor that you were going to refuse to testify even after a potential subpoena was going to be issued?
No, I did not.
And did the governor ever instruct you to cooperate with this committee? And did they encourage you to comply with the request when it was an invitation?
No, it was strictly my decision based on my conversation with my counsel about preparation for a very important hearing, and that was pretty much the extent of it.
And so the governor didn't tell you yes or no whether he thought it was a good reason that you should or should not testify?
The governor did not advise me on that because I sought legal advice.
No. We went by earlier in your testimony, you said that you let the governor know that you had an invitation to testify. Did he respond to that particular comment that you made to him?
I think the response was, as I recall it, was, it's your decision, do what you have to do what you feel most comfortable doing.
Do we have the email? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And actually, Mr. Chairman, I know it's unusual, but the gentlewoman from Michigan wanted me to yield time to her, but in getting a witness to actually answer a question, it was a little difficult. Would you give us the indulgence of allowing her?
We will be, by under House rules, you can do a second round, but we need to go through everybody first.
Okay, thank you,
So
sir.
we're going to actually now recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Grisham.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then I'll be happy to provide minute to my colleague, Ms. Lawrence, and yield to her.
Thank you. I have a question for each of them. Mr. Edwards, in your communications on this issue, do you feel the governor knew what was happening?
I haven't seen emails that showed that he knew about.
Do you feel he should have known?
I feel that the governor should have listened more to the people of Flint and been less trusting of EPA and MDQ.
Mr. Walden, in your role, would the governor or should the governor have known, or are you aware that he knew? You said you contacted his office. Did he know?
He knew of the issues we had in January of 2015 because we did have a follow-up phone call. From the emails that I've seen, it appears that all of his senior aides were aware of extensive issues with DEQ and DHHS.
Mr. Early, you were his direct appointee. Did you communicate with the governor? Was the governor aware of this water situation in Flint?
The situation that I communicated to the governor involved, as I've said, the contamination issues that we were trying to manage when I was there. I had no discussions with the governor regarding lead corrosion or lead contamination.
But you communicated with him that there was a water issue in the city of Flint?
Yes, from the switch.
Ms. Heidemann, did you communicate directly with the governor's staff, the governor, to inform him of the situation that was happening with EPA and the water situation in Flint?
My only communication with the governor's staff occurred in the days leading up to the announcement of the Flint Action Plan, which I think occurred on October 2nd.
Thank you. I yield back the rest of my time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. So I'm going to try to dig a little deeper in that context, because what we all want is good and effective government. And for me, it's irrelevant whether that good and effective protective government is at the federal level, at the state level, or the local level. It should all be working to serve and protect its citizens. And Ms. Hedman, I appreciate your recognition that you could have been more vigorous, but in the context of it's the state's primary responsibility, and that when a state fails, as was the case in Michigan, we have a terrible end result. We have people drinking unsafe water. And I think people want to know if the state of Michigan's failures are typical of other state governments, which is really going to it should cause all of Congress to think about the role of federal government, EPA, and what we do about state accountability in this regard. Now, Ms. Hedman, in a footnote in your written testimony, you mentioned a drinking water crisis that occurred in Toledo, Ohio in 2014. Was the danger to human health in that crisis? Was there danger?
There was. It was the toxin microcystin.
And how long did it take the mayor of Toledo, based on that message from you, to issue a do not drink notice?
He immediately issued a do not drink.
So he immediately reacts. Did the Ohio EPA resist the sampling protocol EPA was recommending, as MDEQ did in the case of Flint?
No, not at all. They took on board all the sampling advice and worked very closely with our Cincinnati lab.
And in fact, in your written testimony, you commend Governor Kasich for his handling of that particular crisis. In fact, you note that he called on the National Guard immediately.
Immediately, Governor Kasich said he would call off the National Guard to deliver bottled water, and he did it.
So I take it that you believe that there's a serious critical difference between the response of Governor Snyder and the response of Governor Kasich.
Yes.
In our investigation of the Michigan crisis, the committee received startling testimony from the former head of the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. He told us that the topic of the Flint water crisis never even made it to the agenda of Governor Snyder's cabinet meetings. Never, not once. In your experience working with Ohio, did Governor Kasich make Toledo's drinking water a priority of his entire administration?
Well, I can tell you that he not only responded quickly in terms of calling out the National Guard to get the water out, after the entire scenario had ended, I believe that he actually reached out and thanked me.
So we can see a stark and dramatic difference between the responsibility of these two states. And I think it's the job of this committee to make sure that the federal government, the state government, and the local government are doing all all it can and should and is required to do to protect its citizens, correct?
I agree.
Thank you. So one last thing, I'm about out of time, but quite frankly,